As soon as we passed Aigna Island, the air raids began. Either the pilots were inexperienced, or only wanted to make a reconnaissance, but running into the fire of the leader and destroyers, they turned away and did not drop bombs. On the bridge of the Revival, anti-aircraft gunners at the cannons also laughing witty. No guts. As always, at 18 o'clock the bugler dashingly played the signal for dinner. In no time the tankers gathered at the galley, and soon the sailors, sitting at the guns and torpedo apparatuses, were eating borscht with appetite. In the wardroom, too, as always, the table was set, and the chief messenger, in all white, invited us to the table. But Petunin, the ship's commander, and I decided to grab something on the bridge. The whole environment was very unusual and turbulent. It was evening. In the southwest, the glow of fires was still rippling over the shore, and smoke was rising high to the sky. The sea had calmed down, the sky in sparse clouds. On the horizon behind us, clearly visible ship's rearguard, you can see how they are short bursts of anti-aircraft fire on the scout planes. Ahead on the course of dozens of transports stretched out in a long chain, going eastward over the horizon. A little to the left of the transports can see the masts and pipes of the cruiser Kirov, as well as guarding its destroyers. In short, the whole sea is piled with a forest of masts. On the approach to Carey Island, we overtake the ships of the third, final convoy. On the decks we hear harmonica and song. The soldiers are waving to us in a friendly manner. The camp dinner was not over, as several groups of junkers began attacks on the transports of the head and end convoys. Airplanes appeared from behind the forest on the southern shore of the bay. The cruiser Kirov, followed by the entire fleet, opened heavy anti-aircraft fire. There was not a single non-firing ship. Beat anti-aircraft guns, machine guns and machine guns of all calibers. Air attack was repulsed. Dozens of bombs, Hitlerites, dropped far from the ships. It seemed to many of us that several enemy planes caught fire and found their end in the sea. Ringing-voiced signallers also reported about it. Anything can be, under the anti-aircraft symphony. And ended our first dinner at the transition. I wanted to believe that the whole first day of the transition will end well. It's getting dark. The sea has completely quieted down. The wind has also subsided. The turbofans of the ships are buzzing. In calm weather, their hum is far spread over the sea, and of course strongly demasquerades us, because by its characteristic sound you can immediately determine which ships are coming. We are standing on the wing of the bridge with Serebrennikov, the commissar of the staff, and we can't take our eyes off the horizon, from the grandiose dawn, against the background of which the masts are swaying. The ships go silently and persistently forward. At 19.00 junkers appeared in the sky again. They went this time in the direction of the first head convoy. Ships of the main forces opened fire from all guns. Fascists, and this time staggered away from the cruiser and, bypassing it, collapsed on the transports. In the twilight, clearly heard ruptures. Even our ship shuddered. We see two bright yellow flashes, turned at once into fires. There was silence on the bridge. The bombs hit the target. Binoculars are fixed on the damaged ships, but they are far away, nothing to see. Always perfectly in control of himself, Captain Second Rank P. N. Petunia loudly commands. Signallers, watch carefully for airplanes. Yes, watch, answered the petty officer. The anti-aircraft guns fell silent. Nazi bombers flew to their airfields. The trawlers are turning to the left, right on the course of the boat without running, reports the signalman. After waiting for the right time, the commander of the ship softly says to the helmsman, "It's left 10 degrees. The ship falls a little to the left, then again lies down behind the minesweepers on the same course. On the starboard side we leave the boat hunter. From him received semaphore. The signalman loudly reads to the chief of staff of the fleet. I pick up the crew of the icebreaker Voldemars. We go further, staring into the thickening twilight. Ahead and to the right on the course glittered flashes, and then came the rolling rumble of heavy gun salvos. A battery from the shore has opened fire, reported the signalman. It's from Cape Uminda. The ship's courses are within range of the enemy's 152mm battery. It's about 110 cable meters away. Far away, but still a hit is possible. Cruiser Kirov opens fire with the main caliber. Enemy battery for a while silent. These ships took advantage of this guarding and covered the convoys and the cruiser smoke screens. Not a single shell of the battery did not hit the ships. The battery again and again tried to open fire, but its menacing roar no longer acted on anyone, and with the onset of darkness, she completely silenced. We observe how skillfully covers the transport's destroyer Svarapy under the command of Lieutenant Commander P.F. Mazepin. His veils are long and impenetrable. Already quite at dusk, our detachment approached the headquarters ship standing by. Veronia was heard on the bridge with regret. The handsome passenger steamer stood languidly without running, tilted on her starboard side and stern settled into the water. Liquid smoke was streaming over it. Apparently the fire had recently been extinguished, and the bosun's crew was still working on the tank with fire hoses in their hands. I order the rescue ship Saturn, which went at our stern, urgently take the Veronia in tow and help her. Squadron destroyer Surovi, which also approached the Veronia, commanded by Captain Second Rank V. F. Andreev, a calm and judicious officer, he skillfully managed the rescue of the Veronia, and she went in tow of the Saturn. The creeping darkness hid the fleet from the eyes of fascist pilots, but there was a new enemy of mine. He came quietly and unnoticed, or rather, we were walking towards him. At dusk, the mines cut by trawls and surfaced remained almost invisible. It was difficult and dangerous to shoot them, because many small ships, especially boats, often passed around the mines. All the attention of the signallers and lookouts was drawn to the sea, for the sky was as if gone, closed from us by darkness. There was no danger lurking there yet. But any object on the water, a barrel, a box, everything seemed to be mines, and the ship was manoeuvring, trying not to touch anything and nobody with its hull, and there were many objects floating by a broken dinghy, broken furniture. And here floated a lifebuoy with the inscription Trawler Crab. On the left, 20 degrees torpedo boats, reported the signalman. They are coming at us. 6 fascist boats were coming at us, at full speed along the almost mirror-like darkening surface of the sea. The commander asks my permission to open fire. The chief artilleryman is setting the guns. Everything is ready. Silence on the bridge, quiet, and at the guns we listen to the reports of rangefinders 90, 85, 80 cable meters. The distance is rapidly shrinking. To fire from a long distance at such small targets means to reduce the chances of a direct hit, and misses will immediately make the gunners nervous. No, we must shoot for certain. 65 cable meters. Almost shouts the rangefinder. I order. Open fire. And at once the 130mm guns of the leader roared. They are echoed by the guns of the destroyer soon. In peaceful days, when guns opened fire during training firing, we usually plugged our ears with absorbent cotton. Admittedly, as a navigator, I was not particularly fond of artillery firing. What pleasant, even caressing sounds our cannonade seemed now. I was standing almost next to the gun. The shock wave was hurting my eyes, but we did not even notice it. We were watching the boats with binoculars. Underflight. Again underflight. The cannons are firing as if slowly. The artilleryman gives commands calmly. Well done. The fascist boats are still coming at us. They're getting closer. And then the sea lights up with orange flames. We hear 3 explosions. One of them is particularly strong. Apparently the torpedoes exploded together with the boat. The wreckage of the second boat is falling. The third. Everything is shrouded in light smoke. Another flash shone through it. Then we saw the 2 surviving boats fleeing north, surrounded by the bursts of our shells. 4 gunboats were destroyed, 2 escaped. There's a hurrah going around the ship. Shout not only our sailors, but also the sailors of Soon. We see how on the tank of the destroyer people enthusiastically waving us visor. Everywhere only and talk about the reflection of boats. After all, they carried 12 torpedoes. This would be enough not only for our Minsk, but also for a couple of similar ships, not to mention the transports that were on our right in parallel courses. So we covered our friends, the commanders at the guns said proudly. The mood was wonderful, but it did not last long. A tongue of fire soared ahead. A deafening blow shook the sea. And here was another explosion, now behind us. The signalmen had no time to make logs. The radio operators were intercepting alarming messages. We learned that the rescue ship Saturn, assisting the Veronia, was killed on a mine and a little later died, and our Veronia. Heavy news follows one after another. Every now and then mines burst in the trawls of the trawlers of the first convoy. We have to change trawls, which delays the general movement. Ships going without lights, it is difficult to hold their place in the line. In the trawls of the third convoy exploded 9 mines. Almost all trawls are broken. And by night in this convoy in good working order was only 1 pair of minesweepers. The fourth convoy also suffered losses. The gunboat I-8 was blown up. There is no connection with the submarine Shaichi 301. Even more difficult situation in the detachment of the main forces, which at this time went to the head of all convoys. Here minesweepers picked up 4 mines at once. Trawls broken. The minesweeper gaffle was damaged. Replacing the trawls created a delay in the movement. Alignment was inevitably broken. In addition, interfered with the attacking ships of the first convoy from behind. The submarine S-5, which was following the cruiser in order not to collide with it, came out of the trawl lane. Here she hit a mine. The explosion was extremely strong, probably detonated torpedoes of the boat. A copper-red flame rose above the sea and quickly disappeared without any smoke. On the bridge of the lost boat was the brigade commander, hero of the Soviet Union, Captain First Rank N.P. Egyptko. He was thrown into the sea by the explosion. He swam for several hours until he was picked up by a boat passing by chance. After a quarter of an hour from the bridge of the cruiser, noticed that the starboard paravan came to the board and floated. A mine was clearly visible in it. Immediately overboard went down 2 sailors with an autogenous burner. They cut off the trawling part of the paravan. Together with it, the mine went down. All this was done while the ship was underway. Mine at any moment could touch the board plating and explode. How much heroism our sailors showed that terrible night. The minesweepers ahead of us continued to pick up mines. The trawls were torn. It was necessary to start new, spare ones. At 21.00, already in the darkness, we passed 3 mines on the left, as suddenly a sailor inspector, standing on the bow near the very stem, blew a whistle and loudly reported. I see mines on the bow. 2, 3, 5. The commander tore the engine telegraphs to full astern. There were indeed 5 black balls floating along the side. And at the same time, a deafening explosion swept over the sea. The destroyer Yakov Sverdlov, the oldest of all our destroyers, disappeared from the sea surface. The cruiser Kirov opened fire from its main caliber. What's the matter? It turns out that 4 fascist torpedo boats have appeared. At the first shots of Kirov, Hitlerites put a veil and disappeared. The sailors of the leader Leningrad also resolutely fought with mines. 2 mines got stuck in its paravans at once. 1 paravan was torn off by the explosion. The other mine surfaced at the board. The sailors pushed it away with poles and, passing it to each other, carried it aft. The ships reported about the discovered mines on the line to all backward going. We watched and listened to distant explosions, then shuddered from the close explosions in the trawls of our trawlers which we followed. Mines were bursting singly and several at once. By 22 hours the trawlers of our detachment had etched and detonated 21 mines. How many terrible horned balls floated further, nobody knows. It is a pity that all trawls were broken. The trawlers went only with paravans in the formation of the ledge to the right. The width of the trawl strip was continuously narrowing, and, in the end, was only 1.5 cables. From the radiogram we learned that the destroyer Slavny for the evening exploded at the side of 2 mines. The ship lost the move. Through the breach he took 420 tons of water and had to temporarily anchor. The ship launched a 6, and the sailors on it, keeping away from the ship's bow, with poles pushed away floating mines, warning the commander about them. Our men can get used to everything, even to such a dangerous occupation. Sailors Slavnoy repaired the damage, and at dawn the destroyer again went with us. This ship was commanded by Captain 3rd Rank Osachi, a brave and resourceful officer. In the dense darkness around here and there lights on the water fires, but the reports of the signallers are already calmer. Explosion on the left 15 degrees. Explosion right on the bow. And already with whom and what happened this we could not make out. We hardly had time to answer the semaphores coming from the ships. No one could turn from the hard path. We were still forcing the minefield, and had to go strictly along the fairway. Quiet running was annoying. Everyone wanted to go the usual for the leader of the big move, not less than 20 knots, but we were bound by slow-moving transports. And the minesweepers could not give more than 12 knots. Very close there was a silhouette of a destroyer. We're going around it. It's the Proud from the main force detachment. Semaphore reports blown up, have no power. I'm sending the minesweeper GAC to him. The destroyer Ferocious is also heading there. And then it was our turn. At 9:40 p.m., the deck beneath my feet jerked. My knees bent painfully, and then shards of porcelain insulators from the mast and some glass fell on my head. No one heard the sound of the explosion, though it was certainly there. Just behind the right wing of the bridge a huge black column rose up. We were showered with dirty, greasy water that smelled of fuel oil. Someone on deck groaned. We heard a command orderly's stretcher. Nobody had time to utter the word mine, but it was clear to everyone that it had exploded near the starboard side, pulled up by a paravan, theoretically designed to divert mines away from the side of the ship. Minsk began to slowly lurch to starboard and at the same time land with its nose in the water. And by the way the leader inexorably, though not quickly, rolled on its side, one could expect that it would inevitably turn over. The thought flashed that in such cases the ship sucks in people, even those who can swim well. It is necessary to save the ship. Captain 2nd Rank Petunin calmly gave the command to the Energy and Survivability post. Level the roll. Report the situation. Well done. Well, it's just like a drill, I thought. Quickly, the whole system of ship's survival struggle came into motion. Human voices were almost inaudible. In the darkness, something was being dragged, something was being dropped, something was bursting and clanking. Sledgehammers struck deafeningly. Hand flashlights flashed, for the ship's lights were out. The helmsman reported. The rudder does not work. The cars stood still. Yes, indeed, the arrows of the tachometer's indicators of the machine's revolutions slowly crept to the left and froze at 0. The fans of the boiler rooms stopped. The ship froze. The heavily wounded giant was lying on its side without a groan. And the signalman reports again. There's a mine on the left 10 degrees. Someone from the staff quietly quips we have enough and won, and the officer of the watch orders the bosun on the tank poles to hold the mine aft and adds a little quieter. Just look there. Be careful. The water overboard is black, cold, and smells of fuel oil. No, swimming in it will not be a pleasure. The mine was held aft and reported it to the back of the destroyer soon, which at our unexpected detonation rolled out to the left, just a little knot crumpled our stern. From the destroyer asked, "Do not need help?" I replied, "Not yet. Stay close and do not go out of the etched strip." How much time passed, it is difficult to say, but on the bridge ran one of the mechanical engineers of the ship, and, breathing heavily, reported. A breach of about 2 square meters between the 45th and 50th spar of the starboard side. Received 600 tons of water. No more water coming in yet. The bulkheads are holding. But there is leakage at the seams. We'll have light soon. Well, the situation's not so bad. The ship is wounded, but not dead. It will live. And how everything seemed different and not so gloomy. The radio operators, adjusting the temporary antenna, promised that radio communication with the fleet commander would soon be restored. They made a report on Kirov to the commander of the fleet blown up on a mine. Took 600 tons of water. I don't need help yet. Many more languid dozens of minutes passed before it became obvious that the ship was no longer lurching, not landing with its nose in the water, and even began to straighten up. But the machinery was still dead, the rudder did not work. With difficulty it was set in the 0 position. We were drifting on a minefield. We should get out on the mapped fairway. But where are the keel lights of our minesweepers? Unfortunately, we can't see them anymore. The minesweepers went forward without noticing our misfortune. I called to the port side the messenger ship picker anchored nearby. I transferred to it all the wounded and passengers. Only his regular crew remained on the Minsk. The commander of the picker is ordered to keep to the keel of the end destroyer of our squadron. Staying without a move, especially in a minefield, is risky. A little dawn, we shot from the shore, and our artillery explosion put out of action. I order the following destroyer soon to come up and take us in tow. He well and quickly came aboard. The commander of the destroyer, Captain 3rd Rank AI Balandin, offers our campaign staff to go to him, assuring us that to manage the detachment should be from a serviceable ship. Perhaps it was theoretically true, but we did not want to leave Minsk, where we had already experienced difficult moments, and the marching staff remained on the leader. Having received all the instructions about the order of towing, wishing us a happy voyage, Scory gave a turn. His stern slowly passed our foretop. The tug began to pull on. Gleaming like a small star was the destroyer's keelwater fire. We were gently jerked forward. Minsk wanted to take the turn, but the tugboat suddenly settled down before it had time to pull up properly. The explosion seemed very distant and deafening to all of us. I only remember in the darkness the shriek of the signalman. Ambulance. Then the sailor's voice was cut off. I saw how the destroyer yawed to the right. Its bow began to rise quickly out of the water, and together with it rose the stern with propellers and rudder. The hull of the ship folded like a penknife and went rapidly into the water. Here a special sound came to the ear, as if dozens of cupboards with a mass of dishes were falling, and the scraping and hissing of steam, as if a red-hot iron was lowered into the water. All this seemed like a terrible dream. The sea was dotted with dozens of heads and dwarfed by inarticulate cries. The stupor on the bridge at once passed. The commander ordered dinghies on the water, ends and circles overboard. This same I ordered Captain 1st Rank Piotrowski to transfer to the back of the coming ships. The dinghies were immediately on the water and rushed into the thick of drowning people. Above the water, the screams were unceasing. I remember a hoarse voice. "Hey, on the dinghy. Take the wounded man. I'll hold on a little longer." We lifted from the water about 100 people. Captain 3rd Rank A, Balandin and Battalion Commissar S. Korpikov were not among them. The commander and commissar remained on the bridge until the end and perished together with their native ship. Apparently, we were still on the minefield. It was too dangerous to go further without minesweepers, and at 22 hours 45 minutes I ordered the covering squad to anchor. The anchor chains rumbled. The detachment was 12 miles west of Wainlow Island. As we looked around, we saw many transports around, and they were also anchored. Not far away found silhouettes of the leader Leningrad and destroyers from the detachment of the main forces. Approached the minesweeper Gak, which I sent to the Gordon to provide assistance. Its commander reported that the SVRP took the Gordoy in tow, but now both destroyers were anchored. By dawn the damage to the Gordoy will be repaired, and the commander expects to go on his own. Receiving reports of the loss of ships and a large number of floating mines, the fleet commander, it turns out, even earlier ordered the entire fleet to anchor before dawn. This order was not received by all ships, as many were damaged communication equipment, so some stopped, others were still moving. Only by midnight all ships were anchored. Explosions stopped by night. The ships strictly observed light cloaking. Only it could cover them from boats and from enemy submarines. Inside the ship did not stop hard work. Sailors were tidying up the machinery and steering gear. Everyone realized that at dawn the enemy aviation would strike. Without a move from it cannot be saved. And the work was boiling. The roll of the ship was almost eliminated, but still persistently held trim on the bow. Soon the radio started working. Visibility completely deteriorated. Rain began to drizzle again. In the darkness we could hear the noise of engines. It was the convoy commanders went around on boats their transports, gave the captains instructions on the order of further movement. There was an ominous silence on the sea. Voices and separate commands were heard on the ships standing somewhere nearby, but most often it was heard. There's a mine on the left. Watch out. There's a mine under your nose. Yes, the mines came and went. All the ships had sailors with poles in their hands. They stared into the darkness until their eyes hurt. Many ships had lowered dinghies from them. It was easier to see the mine. I went down to the deck and heard a light splash of water overboard. Someone was swimming slowly. A voice came from the water. On the destroyer, give me a dinghy. The man was swimming very close to the board. They wanted to throw him the end, but he shouted even louder. Careful, I'm holding on to the mine. The sailor swam and slowly took the mine astern. This was immediately reported on the line to all ships. The sailor was brought aboard. It turned out that he was from the sunken minesweeper, stayed in the water, holding on to the mine for more than 3 hours. He was afraid that some ship would run into it. When he came up on deck, he cast a glance in the direction of the mine and said, "Well, goodbye, my dear. If it weren't for you, I'd be dead. Just watch out, don't touch our ships." And turning to the sailors, asked, "Guys, give me a cigarette." In this courageous calmness was the whole character of our sailor. A boat appeared quite close to us. I ordered him to anchor immediately. And then it turned out that he at dusk in a pair with another boat hunter picked up from the water about 70 people, some of them transferred to the destroyers. I ask in megaphone, "From what ship's people?" Quietly we answer, "From destroyer's rearguard." "Where is Admiral Rawle?" "Wounded, taken from the Kalinin to the boat." "Everything is clear. At dawn you can go to Gogland." I feel terribly tired. I'm hungry. The commander of the leader stayed on the bridge, and we with the commissar of the staff, Serebrennikov, and Nakshtaba Petersky went down to the war room, which is just under the bridge. The commissar of the ship, Regimental Commissar Vospitani, brought dry goods with cumin and a bar of chocolate. He told me how the repair of the machines was going. Time went faster during the conversation. Then LV. Serebrennikov and I went around the ship. I was amazed by the businesslike calmness of the crew, as if nothing special had happened. By morning, one car was back in service. The steering was repaired. The fleet commander reported that the order was given to the aviation commander and the commander of the Kronstadt naval base at dawn to cover the ships from the air and send to Vainlow Island all available patrol ships, torpedo boats, minesweepers and tugs, and relocated for this purpose to Gogland in Suakula Bay, and brought together in a rescue team under the general command of Captain 2 rank IG. Svyatov. Encouraging news. But it is still night, dark and quiet. Again we hear splashes. Clearly people were jumping 1, 2, 3. What's the matter? What's with the night swimming? I ask about it in a megaphone neighbouring transport. The answer is quite unexpected. The sailors jumped overboard to push 2 mines off the side. It's all right. No more explosions were heard. Comflot ordered all ships to start moving according to plan at dawn. At 4 o'clock, the commander of the leader Petunin reported to me that the machines are checked, and we can go at our own pace, but still with trim on the bow. Now the order was passed to the ships of our detachment to anchor at 6.00, and the commander of the leader Leningrad to go head behind the minesweeper Gak. On the Minsk, after the explosion compasses did not work, we needed navigational leading, so we decided to go after the Leningrad. We will be followed by the destroyers Shurovy and Slavny, the messenger ship Picker, and 2 submarines of the type Sheish, which had fallen behind the detachment of the main forces. On one of them went submarine commander Captain 2nd rank Oral. The crew was given a night dinner, although it was already dawn. With what appetite the sailors refueled. The coxswains were satisfied. The prospect of moving forward had made everyone quite peeved. I went down to the wardroom. I walked in and gasped. It looked like a dump of garbage, broken glass and broken furniture. Every item had been ripped out of its place, broken and tossed into a corner. The sideboard was smashed, the dishes on it flew out, and became a pile of shards. In the faint hand flashlight light the wardroom seemed a gloomy cavern. The settee at the side of the ship was still in place, though it was littered with shards of broken lamps. A gramophone with a split record fell into the flashlight's beam. Surprisingly, the gramophone itself was not damaged. I started it up and put the diaphragm on the surviving part of the record. It was strange to hear the cheerful song Kukaraka, performed by the talented opera artist Novikova. Did she ever think that her voice would be heard in such a setting? The Vest sailors heard the music, were glad that their gramophone was alive, and cheerfully began to sing along. After I left for the bridge, the sailors were still spinning this record for a long time. It seems that the music was a healing balm for them. I walk on the bridge. The machine fans are already buzzing. The strong tea has dispelled the sleep. The singer's voice, full of cheerfulness and strength, still sounds in my ears. The night was ending. The silhouettes of the ships were becoming clearer through the fog. A little dawned, the cruiser Kirov, and after him and all the ships of the main force detachment dropped anchor and went after 5 trawlers. 4 others serviceable trawls did not have, and therefore carried only guarding the cruiser from submarines. And immediately began raids of fascist aviation, trying first of all to break through to the Kirov. Powerful anti-aircraft fire of the fleet forced the Nazis to drop bombs 100 to 200 meters from the cruiser. Then, having made sure of the futility of their attempts, all fascist aviation rushed to the transports. The only remaining trawler GAC was ordered to go around the ships with paravane and then stand at the head of the column. Our mine countermeasures were not strong, but we had to use it to the full. No sooner had we given the go, as the boat Mo 208 dashingly flew up to the starboard side, and the commander of the first convoy, Captain 2nd Rank N.G. Bogdanov, reported that his ships were ready to go, and that 2 transports and 2 minesweepers of the convoy were lost. Bogdanov asked to give him air cover. Well, the request was quite legitimate. But where would we get that cover? We started moving east again. Out of formation to our right was the destroyer Ferocious, towing the damaged Gordogo. To strengthen anti-aircraft fire with them went also patrol ship Amethyst. Fascist raids on our group began early in the morning, simultaneously with raids on the cruiser Kirov, and lasted until 11 o'clock. Mines were no longer on the way. Apparently the squad came out of the minefield, and we turned all attention to the bombers. Your anti-aircraft fire was quite weak. Salvation was only in maneuver. The fascists came in groups of 4 to 5 planes, making successive approaches from the stern. All binoculars were directed at the junkers. As soon as we noticed that the bombs were separating from the plane, Petunin commanded left rudder or right rudder. The bombs fell into the water, sometimes, however, much closer than we wanted, sometimes farther away, but never hit the ship. All I could hear was 2 on the right passed. 1 on the left passed. 3 hours passed in incessant manoeuvring. And the day was marvellous. The sun was flooding the quiet, slightly rippling sea. It was cool, but we were standing on the bridge without overcoats, with unbuttoned tunic collars. We were hot. Petunia skillfully managed the ship, and the German pilots, so I did not manage to get into it. Other ships were also attacked. Our anti-aircraft gunners steadfastly repulsed the enemy's air attacks. They shot down 1 bomber, which before our eyes crashed into the water. Having bombed us for the last time on the approach to the island of Gogland, the fascists finally fell behind. And from the island, torpedo boats were already rushing towards the convoys, followed by slow-moving minesweepers, tugs and rescue ships. It is difficult to convey how many trials our people endured during this campaign. At sunset on August 28th, the submarine Sheikh 301 exploded on a mine. Its commander, Captain Lieutenant Greatshave, concussed, long swam in the sea, but fortunately was spotted and picked up by a hunter boat, and then transferred to the headquarters ship Veronia. A few hours later, however, the Veronia was lost as well. Greatshave swam again until he was picked up from the water and taken to Kronstadt. And this is not the only case. Some sailors were picked up from the water 2, 3 times, and they still made it to Kronstadt. The fate of the crew and passengers of the transport Ivan Papanin was tragic. I had long known its captain, the old Baltic sailor Alexander Petrovich Smirnov. In his time he commanded ships of the Soviet merchant fleet, including the 4-masted ocean sailing ship Tovarishch, on which I sailed in my youth. Captain Smirnov travelled around the world, and a few weeks before the war he retired at an advanced age. And suddenly I met him in Tallinn on the dock. "What are you doing here?" I asked him. Alexander Petrovich, a short, dense, outwardly gloomy and grumpy man, but in fact a rare, kindly man, grinned. "Where am I to be if there is a war?" He glanced hurriedly around the bay. "I ordered my slackers to bring a boat by 18 o'clock, and it's not there." I sent him down to the roadstead with a speedboat. It turns out that in the first days of the war, Alexander Petrovich Smirnov came to the steamship department and offered his services. He was appointed captain on the ocean transport Ivan Papanin. When leaving Tallinn, it took on board 3,000 soldiers, 200 vehicles and other army equipment, and went to sea as part of the second convoy. In the evening, the transport was attacked by submarine and airplanes. Skillfully maneuvering a huge ship, Alexander Petrovich dodged 2 torpedoes and several dozen bombs. The next day in the morning, the fascists continued to pursue the transport. The old captain skillfully diverted his ship from a direct bomb hit, guarding the convoy destroyers and patrol ships, conducted continuous anti-aircraft fire, and yet in the afternoon during the next raid 2 bombs hit the transport. Captain Smirnov was wounded, but remained on the bridge. His assistant and many crew members were wounded. On the ship started a fire, burning cars on the deck. The fire main was broken, the rudder jammed. A minesweeper from the convoy escort took the transport in tow and took it to Gogland. The sailors fought hard against the fire raging in the hold. There was no panic. Passengers were also involved in the fight for the survivability of the ship. Senior sailor R.A. Kilkov, being seriously wounded, remained at the helm, following the example of his captain. Other wounded crew members did the same. Assistant Captain V. Novikov, who took command of the ship, seeing his captain's example. V. Novikov, seeing the inevitability of the ship's destruction, threw himself on the southern tip of Gogland Island. A. P. Smirnov was carried ashore in an unconscious state. A few days later he died here. The transport could not be saved, it sank near Gogland, but the men were taken off and brought to Kronstadt. That day some transports, having received fatal damage, were thrown out on the sullen shores of southern Gogland, thus saving thousands of their passengers. By evening more than 5,000 people had gathered on the island. Subsequently they were all taken to Kronstadt. I cannot but remember the heroic epic of the transport Kazakhstan. This ship was the last to load in Tallinn, having taken on board the army men and sailors who were covering the withdrawal of our units from the front. Flames were raging around the pier, shells were falling near, but Kazakhstan managed to take 3,600 soldiers, including 500 wounded, as well as many women and children, and, having reached the roadstead, took its place in the first convoy. Kazakhstan was armed with anti-aircraft guns better than other transports, and quite successfully drove away fascist planes. But on the next day of the campaign the ship was unlucky, a bomb still caught up with it. And then another hit. The whole middle part of the ship was on fire. The fire separated the men, some were in the bow, some in the stern. Colonel Potemin, a senior army officer, raised his men to extinguish the fire. The fire main was broken. Water was supplied along the chain in buckets, and even in helmets. All-day people fought the fire. And fascist aviation did not leave the burning ship. Bombs fell nearby, shrapnel wounded people, the blast wave threw many overboard. From the crew of the ship, only 7 people remained in the line, including the second assistant Captain L. I. Zagorolko and senior mechanic V. A. Fursa. Colonel Potemin together with the assistant captain lit smoke bombs, thus simulating the intensification of the fire. The fascists believed it and left the ship alone. Then the sailors energetically started to repair the machines. As a result of selfless labour at night, they managed to raise the vapours. In the morning the ship reached Vainglow at the slowest speed. The passengers of the transport landed on this small rocky island. Together, with the wounded they were about 3,000 people. Colonel Potemin distributed the fighters in sectors and organised the defence of the island. Every minute you could expect the appearance of the Nazis. Several days people spent in incredible deprivation on this uninhabited piece of land. The fascists bombed the island, but to no avail. In a few days all people were taken out of here by our ships. Transport Kazakhstan came to Kronstadt by its own way. For heroic resistance to the enemy, rescue of the ship and people Colonel Potamin, second mate Zagorulko, Exo Fursa, and many other participants of this campaign were honoured with high government awards. There were many such episodes. What marvellous people we have. And our campaign continued. At Lavansari Island several fighter planes appeared from behind the clouds. I was standing on the deck and talking to the sailors when I heard the song-like hum of our planes. Joy swept over us. Now junkers are not afraid. If Red Star Hawks could fly to us yesterday or today at dawn, many and many ships would have reached their harbour. On August 29th at 17:00, the warships of the Baltic Fleet gave anchor at the big Kronstadt roadstead. And the next day they joined the defence of Leningrad. Their powerful artillery crushed the fascists, who were rushing to the city. Army and navy units delivered by ships were sent to the land front, joined the ranks of the defenders of the city. In the evening we say goodbye to the sailors of Minsk. Our voyage on the Leader lasted only 24 hours, but we will never forget what we experienced. We go to the boat. For a long time we look at the departing ship, at its strict outlines, full of swiftness and power. Low deck, slightly backwards slanted big pipes, long gun mouths and high bridge. The ship is scarred. Holes gaping in the chimneys, in the plating of the sides. On the roadstead, and in the harbours of Kronstadt many ships. Everywhere is being cleaned. Boats and tugboats are going around. As if there is no war. The Baltic Fleet again came to its old base. The grey old forts Peter's contemporaries look glumly. They have seen the sights, and in their time the warlike deeds always ended with the victory of Russian arms. More than one enemy fleet fled in shame from under their walls. The fleet of interventionists during the Civil War also fled. The fascists will flee too. I wanted to shout about it and fought Menshikov, and half-destroyed Pavel, looking at us reproachfully. "What are you thinking about, Admiral?" asked the military commander of the headquarters LV Serebrennikov. I answered not immediately, and what could I say? Probably, many of our officers were thinking the same thing. Is not it all a nightmare dream? After all, so recently we were leaving this raid for Tallinn. The music was blaring. We were going to fight, if necessary, on foreign soil and in foreign waters. We loved the song "The Beloved City Can Sleep in Peace." And now we've retreated. And our beloved city is being shot at point-blank range by the enemy. I want to live to see the day when our fleet will go west again. We'll live to see it, assured Leonid Vasilievich, and here is the familiar staircase of the fleet headquarters, the same ancient with a pendulum, large clock on the landing. I go into one, another office. They are empty. Everyone is having dinner. We go to the dining room. By tradition, my place at the table, to the right of the comfleet. I take it. Tributes became animated, waved his hands. Chief of Staff, you died with Minsky. We've already commemorated you. Not at all, I answer. Minsk is wounded, stands here on the roadstead, and I'm just hungry. There was laughter, but Conflot didn't give up. Chief of Staff, your information is inaccurate. You're dead. Come on, have your dinner. After we'll find out whether it's you or your shadow. The conversation at the table was merry, but I could sense that it was just a release of nervous excitement. In fact, everyone is preoccupied. Here people who are responsible for the fate of the fleet, for the fate of many thousands of people. And of course everyone was worried about the thought, why is it so? It is only the 3rd month of the war, and we have rolled away. I look at the head of the rear, Mitrofan Ivanovich Moskalenko. His bass still drowns out all other voices, and the hair on his head has turned white. In the friendly conversation, as if a heavy burden slipped off his shoulders. Whatever it was, but the fleet and the army in Kronstadt. The battle order was fulfilled, and for any military man it is a matter of honour and life. The question of the death Minsk still bothered me. Where did such information come from? Not far from me sat G.E. Pilipovsky. He began to explain quietly. in the midst of the battle with Nazi planes on the cruiser intercepted someone's distorted radiogram. Only one thing was clear: Minsk had blown up on a mine. Well, it usually ends badly, so they've written you off as a dead man. Yes, that's what almost happened. Fleet headquarters took over their old quarters. But many of the offices were empty because their owners were dead. It was urgent to establish the work of the headquarters, to staff it with people. Luckily for us, there were people. The Kronstadt naval base was disbanded. Some of the officers of its headquarters were transferred to us. There was no sheltered and protected command post in Kronstadt, so the Komflot ordered to urgently prepare a coastal flagship command post. Engineers offered an original solution, and the BFCP was created underground in just a few days. In the garden of the headquarters, builders dug a deep pit, placed in it a large cistern with 2 necks for entry and exit. The interior of the cistern was finished with wood and lincrust, and communications were brought in. At first everything went well, but the first close burst of a Nazi bomb so deafened all of us in this barrel that we left the new shelter at once and never returned there again. Soon the big hill above our unsuccessful CP was overgrown with greenery and remained a monument to the past. We had to quickly get acclimated to the new environment. War knows no rest breaks. Head of the operational department of the headquarters began to select land maps, references and reports. The land situation, of course, worried us very much, and ships kept coming in from the west. On the streets adjacent to the harbour stood elderly men, women with children, patient and silent. They searched with their eyes for their relatives and friends among the people coming off the ships. And those were walking in lines of 50 and 100 people. These units had a strange look. One could not tell whether it was a sailor, a commander, or a civilian. Everyone was dressed in whatever they could find. These are people pulled out of the water. Half dead, wet sailors led them to the cabin, and instead of wet clothes offered them what they found in their chests. And now some of them were wearing white, clean but very short pants, tunics not according to their height. Others were wearing stripes, or even one overcoat thrown over their naked bodies. These teams were sent to the naval crew. After the bath, or as it is customary to say in the Navy, after sanitization, all the sailors received new uniforms and looked like first-year sailors. I met my old friend, Intendant First Rank Peshkov, and our writer Mikhailovsky. Both swam in the water until they were picked up by patrol boats. But not all our co-workers were able to pass through Kronstadt as part of such teams. Many did not reach their native land. They were swallowed up by the sea. Autumn twilight descended, and at the gates of Ustios, Yogotka, and at the wharves in Petrovsky Park, all Kronstadt residents stood waiting for their loved ones. The main forces of the fleet were already included in the everyday combat life. Some ships were waiting for their turn to enter the dock for urgent repair of damages. Others greedily sucked fuel from barges and took ammunition. Battleships and cruisers were ready to open fire on the enemy at the first request. Anti-aircraft gunners kept vigilant watch. At any moment junkers and Messerschmitts could appear. Transports were coming and going from the sea. They had to be quickly unloaded from passengers or sent to Leningrad. The minesweepers, these truly heroic toilers of the sea, towed those ships that could not go on their own. Together with patrol boats, took off the rescued people from the islands of the Gulf of Finland and delivered them to Kronstadt. This work continued for several days and nights. The headquarters had to supervise it, to give instructions about the place of moorings, about cars for receiving the wounded, to warn hospitals and the rear of the fleet. On the morning of August 30th, operational duty on the headquarters of Captain 3rd Rank V.I. Andreev reported to me. Intercepted open radio fascists. They assure that 40,000 Reds were killed near Tallinn. The cruiser Kirov is allegedly badly damaged. 2 more cruisers and 200 transports were sunk. That's all. I remarked. If the fascists have to lie so brazenly, it means that they got Tallinn at a high price. By the way, how many troops have already arrived in Leningrad? I asked the head of the operations department. Pilipovsky poured through the references. According to preliminary data, no less than 17,000 fighters. I think it will be a good help to Leningrad. Well, what do you hear about the enemy at sea? Except for his bullshit on the air. Andreev continued. Our submarines at the positions at the entrance to the Gulf of Finland and the Gulf of Riga have not detected the enemy. We have long noticed that the Germans relied on mines and air raids, but did not dare to provide assistance to the seaside flank of their army by the fleet. In fact, there was no interaction between the army and the navy of the Nazis at sea. And it turned out that the fascist army independently solved all maritime problems on land by capturing our naval bases, without any help from their surface fleet. This cost the fascists great losses both at Libava and especially at Tallinn. All the worse for them. The enemy's tactics were directly opposite to ours. From the first hour of the war, our army and navy defended their homeland shoulder to shoulder. For the last 3 days we have lagged behind the details of the land situation, so we listened with special attention to the report of the Chief of Staff of the Kronstadt Naval Base, Captain 2nd Rank F. V. Zozuli, about the difficult situation in the Bay of Vyborg. Even before the war, one had to visit the Vyborg fortified sector of coastal defence. Its commandant, if I am not mistaken, Colonel Rumiantsev, reported then that unlike the Baltic district, our coastal border is somewhat better equipped in engineering terms. The coastal defence forces have the necessary plan of interaction with the units of the 23rd Army of Lieutenant General MNE Gerasimov. The conversation mainly concerned the artillery of the fleet. Vyborg fortified sector of coastal defence consisted of 12 stationary batteries from 45 to 153 mm caliber and anti-aircraft artillery division. The batteries were mainly located on the islands of the Vyborg Bay, covering the approach from the sea to Vyborg and the left flank of the 23rd Army, which faced the sea. They were stationary, and their fate depended on the stability of the land front. June 26th, the enemy opened fire on our batteries, but those with their accurate return fire quickly silenced him. 3 days later, the enemy tried to break through the front in the seaside area, but it failed. The Army and Navy artillery stopped him. Having regrouped his forces and created a large numerical superiority, on July 31st the enemy began an offensive against Leningrad on the Karelian front. He threw against us 2 corps of 7 divisions each, with strong support of aviation. After 20 days, the enemy managed to break through the front. Our troops began to withdraw to the south, leaving Vyborg. The ground troops were actively assisted by ships of the Skeri detachment, but the enemy continued to advance. Particularly heavy losses were suffered by the 50th Rifle Corps. Its 115th and 123rd Divisions, caught in the encirclement, lost artillery, tanks, and even most of the small arms. That was the end of our Vyborg sector, said Fyodor Zozulia. You can imagine how hard it was to blow up perfectly serviceable naval batteries. But there was nothing else left. They found themselves in the deep enemy rear. A 152mm cannon can't be taken under the arm, can't be carried with you. We had to destroy everything. Without much analysis and calculations, it became obvious that with the maneuverable nature of modern warfare, there is no logic to build stationary expensive batteries, and even on the front line of defence. So we lost brand new batteries at Libava, Vindava and Tallinn, and in the same difficult conditions we did not lose a single railroad battery. Apparently, along with the old fortress artillery, the fleet should have more batteries on railroad platforms and self-propelled guns on Mektiaga. We should have come to this conclusion long ago, knowing how widely used by the Nazis aviation and tank formations to carry out deep bypass maneuvers. Unfortunately, everything new is born slowly and is always hampered by the old, taken route, put down deep roots. A naval regiment was formed from the personnel of the batteries of the Vyborg district, which with heavy battles passed behind the Lahaniemi Peninsula. Covering the parts of the 23rd Army that were retreating to the south, it held back the onslaught of the whole enemy division. 2 destroyers and a gunboat continuously supported the regiment until it, pressed against the shore, passed from the mainland to the island of Byorki. We turn to the land map of the Leningrad area. Here the situation is clear, but also very formidable. To the east of the city, the fascists came to the Neva River at Ivanovsky Rapids, occupied the stations Popovka, Yamizora, Chernaya Rechka. The enemy 6 kilometers from Kolpin. The study of the land situation was interrupted by an urgent report from the headquarters of the Sea Defence of Leningrad. It was the first combat report addressed to the fleet headquarters in Kronstadt. I read it aloud. Our destroyers of the Neva River Detachment and the Sea Range opened fire on the advancing fascists in support of our land units, so reported Rear Admiral I. Gren on August 30th. These were the first salvos of the fleet on the enemy near Leningrad. The Red Banner Baltic Fleet was entering a new stage of the fight against the Nazis. It was included in the direct defense of the city of Lenin. It was necessary to adjust all the work of the fleet headquarters, rear and fleet departments to it. And above all, we needed a reliable connection with the headquarters of the armies defending Leningrad, and of course with the headquarters of the Leningrad front. Not forgetting the sea direction, we had to turn to face the land front. Later, by nightfall, it turned out that, during the first day of firing the ships on the Neva and the guns of the naval range near Rzhevka fired 28 times at the request of the Army Command and fired 340 shells from 130 to 406 mm caliber. Even more intense was the naval fire the next day. On the southern coast of the Gulf of Finland, the Red Army units were retreating eastward with fighting. The enemy was tearing towards Leningrad. Already on September 1st, our strongest 12-inch coastal batteries on the famous Fort Krasnaya Gorka opened murderous fire on fascists. Hitlerites, caught under the shells, stopped, and then began to streamline the fort at the limit of range of its guns. To organize the defense of the sea approaches to Leningrad in early July, by order of the People's Commissar of the Navy, began the formation of the command and headquarters of the sea defense of Leningrad and the Lake District. This organization was at first subordinated to the Chief of the Northwest Direction, and with the arrival of the Military Council in Kronstadt directly to the fleet commander. It played a major role in the defense of Leningrad, especially from the eastern direction. Already in mid-August, the MOL headquarters formed and installed in the area of Nevskaya Dubrovka, and the mouth of the Neva River 6 batteries removed from ships, 18 guns 120 mm, and an additional 2 guns 180 mm caliber. The batteries were manned by sailors and retained the names of those ships where these sailors served. When visiting the batteries, their commanders were introduced to me in this way. The battery commander of the battleship Marat. Or the battery commander of the minesweeper OK. Troop numbers assigned to each battery were not used in everyday life. To strengthen the Neva operational group of the army troops was formed by the Neva River Ships Detachment consisting of 2 destroyers, 4 gunboats, 3 patrol ships, 4 armoured boats, 12 patrol boats, 4 minesweepers, 2 torpedo boats, and 1 floating battery. From the artillery point of view, it was a very strong compound. The detachment was commanded first by Captain 1st Rank V. S. Cherokov, and then by Captain 2nd Rank S. D. Solukhin. Coastal batteries and ships of the Neva River Detachment interacted with the units of the Neva Task Force. This group began to be created only on September 4th. It included several divisions withdrawn from the Kaelian front, as well as the 4th Marine Brigade evacuated from the islands of Lake Ladoga. Creation of the Nevsky fortified area from the forces of the army and the navy was important in the further defense of the city. On the night of September 9th, the enemy tried to force the Neva River, but was decisively repulsed by units of the Nevsky Task Force, supported by the fire of ships of the Neva River Detachment. Now it is quite obvious how difficult the situation at Nevskaya Dubrovka would have been in those days if this powerful fortified area had not been created in time. August 31st, People's Commissar of the Navy arrived in Kronstadt. N.G. Kuznetsov listened to the report Komflot, called all commanders of compounds involved in the transition from Tallinn to Kronstadt. Admiral inquisitively looked at our faces, concentrated on something thought. "Of course you have experienced a lot," he said. "I have not been with you and have not yet understood everything, but apparently you have done everything that was in your power." Then the People's Commissar explained the general situation at the front and in the fleets, demanded to pay special attention to the fight against the enemy's aerial reconnaissance and reliably cover the approaches from the sea to Kronstadt and to the flanks of our armies with mines. People's Commissar demanded to submit to him a report on the transition of the fleet. He warned. "Don't be in a hurry. Carefully, thoughtfully understand, so that you can make the right conclusions. The situation near Leningrad became more complicated hourly, demanded immediate action, so the report on the Tallinn epic had to be postponed. But we thought a lot about its lessons. Undoubtedly, the experience of the defence of Tallinn was of great importance. It came in handy in the battles for Odessa and during the evacuation of its garrison. True, there the ships were easier, they did not force minefields, did not go between the banks occupied by the enemy and saturated with artillery and airfields. In addition, our aviation covered the Black Sea ships. And yet the experience of the Baltic Fleet apparently was taken into account by the High Command, because the preparation and evacuation of troops from Odessa was given 20 days instead of 2 days, which were at our disposal. When analysing the past events, first of all, the question arises, was it necessary for the fleet and the army to defend Tallinn until the last opportunity, until the fighting on its outskirts? There can be only one answer, of course. It was necessary, because every hour of fighting at the walls of Tallinn, every fascist killed here, and even more so the fascist divisions that had been restrained at Tallinn, were a real help to our native Leningrad. Truly, defending Tallinn, grinding fascists under its walls, we were defending the great city of Lenin, the cradle of the great October Socialist Revolution. This was understood by everyone from a sailor to an admiral. It is natural, therefore, that the idea of premature abandonment of Tallinn never arose either in the headquarters or on the ships and in the units. Another thing is whether it was reasonable, after almost all Estonia was occupied by the enemy, for all the institutions of the capital of the Republic with all their numerous staff to remain in the blockaded city. Should almost the entire fleet with its auxiliary watercrafts, fleet departments, fleet rear departments, manning agencies and many other fleet institutions have remained in the base in their entirety? After all, not every employee of these institutions could be useful to the front, and not every ship had a cannon to shoot at the enemy. Our deep conviction was that only the forces and means directly connected with the defence of the base and the city, i.e., the forces of the army and the fleet, headed by the Military Council of the Fleet, with its marching staff, or the task force of the headquarters and political department, should be in Tallinn until the last hour. In other words, only those who could bear arms and beat the enemy, who managed or directly ensured the management of ships, units and divisions, were to remain in the base. And the ships should have been left only those that could, with their artillery fire, to support our land forces and strike at the Nazis. We had more than enough such ships in Tallinn at the end of August. And least of all we needed old destroyers, patrol ships, minesweepers and many other ships with weak artillery, or even without it at all, staying in the roadstead of the entire fleet, deprived of freedom of manoeuvre, because the bay is limited in size, was a great and, most importantly, unjustified risk. It was a tasty target for both aviation and field guns of the enemy. We understood it perfectly well, and twice addressed to the command with the corresponding proposals, but every attempt to evacuate any connection or fleet institution, which was completely unnecessary for the defence of the base, was considered painfully by the leadership of the Northwest Direction and other authorities. What did it lead to? On August 26th, the Commander-in-Chief of the Northwest Direction ordered the Navy Military Council to transfer troops from Tallinn to strengthen the defence forces of Leningrad and evacuate all the institutions of the city, fleet and naval base. There were only 2 days left for the preparation of this complex operation, and the fascists were already on the outskirts of the city. To fulfill the task required several dozen large transports. Naive, of course, reasoning about the possibility of stealthily from the enemy to evacuate the base and troops at a time when before his eyes in the blocked base urgently came dozens of unloaded transports. What choice of a rational time for the transports to leave the base could we talk about, when the landing of troops on the last transports took place under the bombs of aviation and under the fire of field artillery of the fascists, who had already occupied some of the heights of the Koz-Pirita area, dominating over the raid? We should have thought about all this earlier. The fact that a lot of unnecessary institutions and people remained in Tallinn until the very last day was a mistake of the High Command, and our misfortunes and unnecessary sacrifices were laid in it. Later we addressed to the Doctor of Naval Sciences, a great expert of mine torpedo business, captain of the first-rank Kaireev, with a question: how many, in his opinion, it would be necessary to have minesweepers to conduct almost 200 ships through minefields of the Gulf of Finland. Based on the data available in the fleet headquarters about the Nazi minefields, Kaireev concluded that their density was at least 155 mines and 104 mine defenders for every mile of the minefield front. This is a very high density. To get the ships through such an obstacle, several rows of trawls were needed. Kyriev reported to us with conviction that a minimum of 100 minesweepers was required. In other words, he confirmed all our preliminary calculations, which I have already written about. The fleet had only 10 basic minesweepers. It was known in advance, as well as the fact that the airfields near Tallinn are occupied by the Nazis and the fleet is deprived of any air cover. And yet the surrounded city was not unloaded in advance from everything that was not directly related to its defence. But then we could go to sea, not with 200 ships, but with only 20, and 10 minesweepers would have coped well with the protection of the convoy from mines. Comrades often ask me how our fleet headquarters worked at that difficult time. What were we doing right, and what were our blunders? Questions are far from idle, and I will try to answer them. First of all, about people. The headquarters of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet was staffed with experienced, educated sailors. The party organisation of the headquarters rallied the communists into a friendly and efficient team. I considered it a great honour to serve in such a team and moreover to lead it. We worked hard and with all diligence. It was not our fault, but our misfortune that this work did not always bring the desired results. We acted the way we were taught back in the Naval Academy, the students of which were almost all of our staff commanders. Year after year we were brought up to believe that we would fight on foreign territory, with little blood, quickly and successfully. And we tirelessly developed active offensive plans. Of course, there was some benefit from these trainings. We acquired skills in planning operations, learned to make calculations quickly. There was also a practical benefit. Calculations made by us in peacetime came in handy, in particular, in the setting of defensive mines, in the deployment of submarines, in the organization of operational air reconnaissance. But many voluminous folders with operational documents, the result of long and painstaking work of the staff, were not even opened during the whole war. They turned out to be simply unnecessary and suitable only for the archive. Life imperiously dictated its own. Thus we urgently needed, if not plans, then at least approximate calculations for the evacuation of our naval bases. We had never drawn up such documents. In fact, who could have mentioned it before the war? And that's why we immediately found ourselves in a time crunch. For the evacuation of naval bases, the fleet headquarters, and all the headquarters of formations and rear guard bodies were completely unprepared. Hence the inevitable overlaps, losses of ships, personnel and property. And if there are losses, look for the culprits. And the headquarters were under the attack first of all. They say, did not foresee this and that. It is forgotten that, until a telegram came from Stavka to leave such and such a base, no one dared to make a peep about withdrawal. But now the withdrawal was made, and new problems arise where to send the retreating formations of ships, where to base them in the future. After all, no one was waiting for a whole brigade of submarines in Tallinn from Riga. It fell on our heads like snow. And we are puzzled again where to base it, how to provide it with all the necessary things. It had to urgently calculate, and together with the rear to plan the operational department of the headquarters. We had to act quickly and hastily. Many compounds on the withdrawal suffered losses. Their existence in the previous organizational forms lost meaning. This was the case, for example, with the control bodies left us Riga base, the protection of its water area and other compounds. Commanders, sailors and the ships themselves were without regular places. Here before the head of the organizational department of the fleet headquarters, Colonel Elian and his subordinates had urgent tasks to urgently disband or reform various compounds. So were completely disbanded management bodies and compounds, first Libava and a few days later and Riga naval bases. The most dangerous thing during the war is idle people. And here it was necessary to reassign and send to the place of new service hundreds of soldiers and commanders. It was not easy to do this, because in most cases we were talking about people who had been through a lot and traumatized. It was necessary to talk to each of them sensitively and find them a worthy place. Time flew by quickly. As soon as we had dealt with Riga, Tallinn itself was under threat. All this new complex of affairs fell on us, as they say, unexpectedly. The enemy was advancing, our ground troops were retreating with fights, and after them, Leaving our bases, we were also retreating. Thus, from the first days of the war, we made continuous redeployment and reforming of the fleet formations. Libava, Riga, Tallinn, Kronstadt. Tens of thousands of people and hundreds of ships, deprived of their permanent bases, came into motion. The fleet's supreme governing body, its headquarters, had to lead all this dynamic, complex and contradictory process, without being prepared for it. Now it can be stated with full clarity that if the command and staff of the fleet, after the loss of Libava, given freedom of initiative, our affairs at sea would have been much better. But we were dominated by the general system of war management to wait for the decision of Stavka, despite the fact that life insistently dictated its requirements. This was the iron law of time. Almost uninterrupted during the first months of the war, redeployment of the fleet to new bases, disbandment of some and urgent organization of other parts, the first losses could not help but create sometimes nervous situation in all levels of fleet management. Everyone wanted to find the real culprit of our failures, the failure of all our victorious plans and calculations. Even the big people did not yet realize that we were experiencing the collapse of some of the provisions of our pre-war doctrine. It was not up to it. We needed a living culprit. I remember long night conversations with prosecutors and investigators. We tried to honestly and objectively illuminate to them the combat activity of some of our subordinates, on whom the blame for military failures was undeservedly laid. I remember unpleasant conversations with one high-ranking chief, Comrade Chief of Staff. He insisted on me. Why our fleet is not advancing? Why can the Nazis attack, but we cannot? I tried to explain the complexity of the situation, but he did not listen. No, I don't agree with you. Headquarters is in the wrong business. It is necessary to develop active operations and to act to attack. This was said in those tragic days when we left Riga and the fascists threatened the whole of Estonia. It was urgent to create a system of land defense of the main base of the fleet, Tallinn. The chief of the operations department and I spent hours reporting to the general on the interrelation of all the operations we conducted at sea with the army's actions in the Baltics. We were no longer talking about a pure sea war, but about cooperation with the retreating army, about the defense of Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. This was becoming the main thing for us. But our reasoning was not taken seriously, and the fleet headquarters in the eyes of the big chief who talked to us was close to the position of the culprit of all the troubles. Meanwhile, according to the plan of the fleet headquarters, the light forces and aviation were successfully and very actively laying mines in Finnish skerries, submarines were threatening fascist communications all over the Baltic, our pilots were sinking enemy ships, though, of course. All this could not change decisively and quickly the situation on the land front, which was already in Estonia. These lines are not written with the purpose of presenting the fleet headquarters in an infallible form. There are no infallible in war. In those memorable days and weeks, not only our infantry, tankers, pilots and sailors learned to fight. A hard and bitter school was also passed by staffs, staff workers and commanders of all degrees. In the early days of the war, one of our unfortunate omissions was the lack of clear interaction between aviation and ships, especially with submarines. Most often the reason for this was poor organization of tactical aviation reconnaissance. Pilots were not always able to correctly determine the class of enemy ships and their speed. Barge, tugboat, laiba, sign are taken for transport, and any small warship, if it is not a torpedo boat, attributed to the class of destroyers, a larger ship necessarily considered a light cruiser. It is not difficult to guess what led to such mistakes. To hit destroyers and cruisers requires a completely different organization of forces than to hit the transports and self-propelled barges. These miscalculations cost us dearly, especially when the struggle unfolded in the Abensky Strait. Practice has shown that to receive data in time and quickly put them on the map of the operational situation is not everything. The main thing for the operator is to immediately compare the received data with the previous data of the situation and make the necessary operational and tactical conclusions. Before the war, we apparently did not sufficiently teach commanders at the academy and in the Navy. With these gaps in their training, they entered the war. When now, many years after the victory, studying the operational documents of that time, it becomes clear that, using combat reports, the headquarters could make more thorough and far-reaching conclusions than those that we reported to the Conflot. Of course, it is impossible to imagine that from the first days of the war in it participated only experienced, already wise past battles chiefs. It does not happen like that. The more valuable is the experience of the patriotic war, which will be of great benefit in the training of our current officer cadres. I cherish myself with the hope to bring to the readers at least a grain of this experience, gained at a high price. On August 31st, late in the evening was received the order of the Commander-in-Chief of the Northwest Direction. This was probably his last order. By the GKO decree of August 29th, the Northwestern Command and its headquarters were disbanded. The Leningrad and Karelian fronts were transferred to the direct subordination of the Stavka. The Red Banner Baltic Fleet was promptly subordinated to the commander of the Leningrad front. In the order, the fleet was given the task to defend Leningrad from the sea, not to allow the flanks of our armies to be bypassed by sea. We were required to strengthen the sea flanks of the armies by setting mine barriers, allocation of artillery ships, constant fire support of land units. Our duty remained the reconnaissance of the enemy on the sea direction, actions on his sea communications, defence of the Moonsund Islands and Hanko base. No one rested at night in the headquarters. First of all, it was necessary to determine the place of mine laying. Along both shores of the Gulf of Finland, land units with persistent fighting were withdrawing to the east, and it was not easy to find out where exactly are now their flanks. To lay mines allocated a squad of ships consisting of a minesweeper, destroyer, minesweepers and boats hunters. The commander of the minesweeper, Captain First Rank N. I. Meshchersky, appointed commander of the detachment, was called to the headquarters. Komflot explained him the situation, ordered him to immediately take mines and prepare for the campaign. Always calm, poised, Meshchersky replied, "I have," and, leaving the Komflot's office, immediately telephoned the ships and gave the necessary orders. I signed a number of preliminary orders to the chief of the rear on the urgent submission of mines to the ships, the commander of the protection of the water area on the production of preliminary trawl, reconnaissance of the places of mine laying. In a room with darkened windows, at a large table bent over the map officer's operators, thinking over the order of action. For many hours they have been working, making calculations. Tired fleet, tired army. But time is of the essence, we must hurry, strain all our strength. The unceasing rumble of the cannonade, which makes the window panes shake and tinkle, reminds us of this. The cannonade rumbled under the walls of the city. All Leningraders, from small to great, listened to it with anxiety. They believed in us, hoped for us. At last the plans of mine laying were approved by the fleet commander, and the executive documents were handed over to the commanders of the ships. At dawn on September 1st, the ships began to lay mines in Koper Bay, near Seskar Island, where an enemy submarine had already been detected, under the southern shore, near the Shepelevsky Lighthouse, and under the northern shore, near the Stursudden Lighthouse. The deployments were made successfully, without much interference from the enemy. Repeatedly appearing submarine was driven away by depth bombs. Meanwhile, our gunboats were firing artillery at the advancing enemy infantry in the areas of Koper Bay and in the vicinity of Sestroretsk. The firing of their guns was overlapped by powerful salvos of 180mm guns of railway artillery on the southern shore and 10-inch guns of the northern Kronstadt forts, hitting large targets in the depth of the Nazis. The 23rd Army, with the support of naval artillery, managed to stop the Nazis on the line of the old state border, but it was only 30 kilometers from Leningrad. There was a mighty rumble in the air. If the forts were silenced for a while, line ships or cruisers opened fire. Kronstadt was formidable. Dozens of its guns threw shells at the enemy. As a rule, the firing was conducted with the help of coastal correction posts and was characterized by great accuracy. The enemy fiercely stormed Leningrad, intending to occupy it from the start. Ships and Kronstadt he has not yet touched. Although Hitler's propaganda repeatedly announced on the radio that the Baltic Fleet, as a force, no longer existed, but the fascists made air reconnaissance of Kronstadt day after day. We, unfortunately, very badly fought with spy planes. We detected them late, and therefore anti-aircraft fire was ineffective, and there was almost no fighter aviation in Kronstadt. It operated at the front near Leningrad. Not a single scout we did not shoot down then. Conflot often called the Commander of Aviation General M.I. Samokin on this occasion, demanding to take the most decisive measures, but apparently it was not so easy to do it, since the fighter aviation was in operational subordination to the front. We strictly demanded that the ships did not stand long in one place, and with the departure of the air scout necessarily change their disposition. It was difficult to maneuver even destroyers, not to mention cruisers and battleships in the navigational constraints of the Kronstadt raids. But using the sea canal, the Bolshoi and the Eastern Rays, we still tried to move the ships, not to let them stagnate.